The Forest Whispers, Secrets of Pine Hollow. Chapter 1, A Quiet Town. It was the kind of town you'd miss if you blinked. A dot on the map with a single diner, a gas station, and a post office that doubled as a grocery store. Everyone in Pine Hollow knew everyone else, or so they thought. Jessica, a freelance writer, had come to town for solitude. She rented a creaky old cabin at the edge of the woods, hoping the quiet would help her finish her overdue novel. But solitude was a double-edged sword, and Jessica soon found herself drawn into the strange rhythms of Pine Hollow. It started with the noises. At first, she thought it was just the forest. Branches snapping, owls hooting, the occasional rustle of leaves. But then she began hearing whispers, faint and fleeting, like someone speaking just out of earshot. She dismissed it as her imagination, the byproduct of too many late nights and too much caffeine. Chapter 2. The lights. Then came the lights. On moonless nights, Jessica noticed faint, flickering glows deep in the woods. Fireflies, she told herself. But fireflies didn't move in patterns, and they certainly didn't form shapes that looked like letters. One evening, unable to ignore her curiosity, Jessica grabbed a flashlight and followed the lights. The woods were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made her hyper-aware of every crunch of leaves beneath her boots. The lights seemed to dance ahead, leading her deeper and deeper into the forest until she stumbled into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a wooden post, weathered and splintered with age. Nailed to it was a piece of paper, edges curled and yellowed. Jessica's heart pounded as she stepped closer and read the words scrawled in a shaky hand. Do not trust the faces you know. Chapter 3. The Warning. She froze, the flashlight trembling in her grip. The whispers returned, louder now, as if they were all around her. She spun in a circle, the beam of light slicing through the darkness, but there was no one there. Only trees, looming and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky. Jessica tore the paper from the post and hurried back to the cabin, her pulse racing. She locked the doors, drew the curtains, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note. What did it mean? Was it some sort of prank? A warning? And why had the lights led her to it? The next morning, she decided to ask around town. At the diner, she showed the note to Betty, the waitress who seemed to know everything about everyone. Betty's face went pale the moment she saw it. Where did you find this? Betty whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be listening. In the woods, Jessica replied. Why? What does it mean? Betty didn't answer. Instead, she folded the note and shoved it back into Jessica's hands. Forget you ever saw this, and stay out of the woods. Chapter 4. The Forest Calls. That night, the lights returned. This time, they were closer, hovering just outside her cabin. Jessica watched from the window, her breath fogging up the glass. She thought about Betty's warning, but curiosity burned brighter than fear. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside. The lights darted away as if inviting her to follow. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. But something, a whisper barely audible, urged her forward. As Jessica ventured into the woods, the lights seemed to surround her, pulsating like a heartbeat. They led her back to the clearing, but this time the wooden post was gone. In its place was a shallow grave, freshly dug. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She knelt down, her fingers trembling as she brushed away the loose dirt. Her flashlight flickered, and for a moment she was plunged into darkness. When the light came back, she saw it, a hand, pale and lifeless, sticking out of the earth. Chapter 5. Betty's Revelation. She stumbled backward, her mind racing. Who was it? How had they ended up here? And why did the lights lead her to them? The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Jessica turned to run, but standing at the edge of the clearing was Betty. Her face was expressionless, her eyes glinting in the dim light. I told you to stay out of the woods, Betty said, her voice cold and hollow. Now you've seen too much. Before Jessica could respond, the light surged forward, engulfing her in a blinding glow. The last thing she heard was the sound of whispers, overlapping and endless, as if the forest itself was speaking. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The next morning, Pine Hollow's sheriff found Jessica's cabin empty. Her car was still in the driveway, her belongings untouched. The only sign she had ever been there was a single piece of paper left on the kitchen table. Do not trust the faces you know. For weeks after Jessica's disappearance, the town buzzed with rumors. Some said she had fled, overcome by the isolation. Others whispered that something darker had taken her. Betty, meanwhile, returned to her usual routine, though those who knew her well noticed a subtle change. She seemed quieter, more withdrawn. Chapter 7. The Second Disappearance. Then came the second disappearance. A local teenager named Ryan ventured into the woods on a dare. When he didn't return, a search party was organized. They found his backpack near the same clearing Jessica had discovered, but there was no sign of Ryan. Only another note nailed to a tree. The forest keeps its secrets. The town's unease grew. Parents forbade their children from playing near the woods. Hunters and hikers avoided the area altogether. But the lights persisted, visible from the town on moonless nights, flickering like distant stars. Chapter 8. David's Investigation. Jessica's brother, David, a private investigator from the city, arrived in Pine Hollow 3 months after her disappearance. Determined to find answers, he rented her cabin and began retracing her steps. David wasn't one to believe in ghost stories or small-town superstitions, but the deeper he delved, the more he realized Pine Hollow was far from ordinary. Locals were tight-lipped, refusing to discuss the woods or the disappearances. Betty avoided him entirely. The only person willing to talk was an elderly man named Henry, who claimed to have lived in Pine Hollow his entire life. The woods have always been strange, Henry told David over a cup of coffee at the diner. People go in, and sometimes they don't come out. It's been happening for as long as I can remember. Why hasn't anyone done anything about it? David asked. Henry shrugged. What can we do? The forest is alive in its own way. It protects itself. Those lights you've seen? They're not natural. They're warnings. Chapter 9. The Grove. David's skepticism wavered as he pieced together Jessica's final days. He found her notes, filled with descriptions of the lights and whispers. He followed her path into the woods, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The whispers began almost immediately, faint and disjointed, like fragments of forgotten conversations. The lights appeared, guiding him deeper. He reached the clearing and saw the shallow grave, now empty. The earth was undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been buried there. A new note was pinned to a nearby tree. You are not welcome here. David's resolve hardened. He set up cameras around the cabin, determined to capture evidence. For 3 nights, nothing happened. But on the 4th night, the lights returned, brighter and more erratic. The whispers grew louder, their tone almost frantic. The cameras recorded nothing but static. Chapter 10. The Final Choice. In the morning, David found a fresh note on his doorstep. Leave or you'll join them. Despite the warning, David refused to back down. He explored the woods daily, mapping out the lights' movements and documenting the whispers. He discovered symbols carved into trees, their meanings unclear but unmistakably deliberate. He found remnants of old campsites, long abandoned, with belongings left behind as if the occupants had vanished in a hurry. One night, David followed the lights farther than ever before. They led him to a hidden grove where the air felt thick and electric. In the center of the grove was a massive oak tree, its bark etched with hundreds of symbols. At its base was a circle of stones, each one engraved with a name. Jessica's name was among them. As David stepped closer, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. The lights swirled around him, faster and faster, until he was blinded by their intensity. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Betty, her expression unreadable. It's not too late to leave, she said, but if you stay, you'll never escape. David's choice hung heavy in the air. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. He took a step forward, toward the oak tree, and the lights consumed him. Chapter 11. The legend lives on. In Pine Hollow, the lights still dance on moonless nights, and the whispers continue to call. The townsfolk know better than to follow, but every so often a stranger arrives, drawn by curiosity or desperation, and the forest always welcomes them. Chapter 12. Henry's Secret. Months after David's disappearance, Henry was seen less and less around town. Rumors began to circulate that he had been involved in the disappearances all along. One evening, a group of townsfolk decided to confront him. They found him in his home, surrounded by old maps and journals filled with cryptic notes about the forest. "I've been trying to understand it my whole life," Henry admitted. "But the forest, it has its own will. It chooses who stays and who goes." Henry's words only deepened the town's fear. That night, his house burned to the ground. Henry was never seen again, but some claimed to see his figure wandering near the edge of the woods, his whispers joining the chorus. Chapter 13. The Newcomer. A year later, a new family moved into Jessica's old cabin. The parents, unaware of the cabin's history, dismissed the warnings of the townsfolk as small-town superstition. Their young daughter, Emily, was the first to notice the lights. She would sit by the window, watching them dance, and hum a tune she claimed the whispers had taught her. One night, Emily vanished. The family searched frantically, but all they found was a note on her bed. "She belongs to us now." Chapter 14. The Researcher. A paranormal investigator named Claire arrived in Pine Hollow to document the strange occurrences. Equipped with advanced tools and a skeptical mind, she spent weeks exploring the woods. She discovered that the symbols etched into the trees formed a pattern, a map leading to the grove. Claire's recordings captured faint voices and flashes of light, but she never returned from her final expedition. Her last entry read, "I think I understand now. It's not just a forest, it's alive." Chapter 15. The Final Whisper. Years passed, and the disappearances slowed, but the fear never left Pine Hollow. The lights still appeared, and the whispers never ceased. One winter night, the townsfolk awoke to find a message etched into the snow in front of the diner. "We are always watching." The town slowly emptied, its remaining residents unable to bear the constant presence of the forest. Pine Hollow became a ghost town, but the forest remained, its secrets buried deep, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter.